to tonight's Tanya class. We are in Tanya, we finished all 4 sections, but now we're in the last section called Kuntros Achrein. We call it the last few essays, and we're up to essay number 3 of the last essays. In Hebrew it's called Kuntros Achrein, in English it's called Last Essays, and it is the 3rd essay. As always, we say that Tanya is the Bible of mysticism, so every chapter is important because it teaches you things you probably never learned before, and there's usually many messages, but we're going to pick one message of this chapter, and that is this chapter 3, is very, very important because it teaches you the most impactful type of prayer and the most impactful type of Torah study. In other words, when you study Torah, so there's many levels. When you pray, there's many levels. So here the author is going to show you the most impactful and the strongest type of Torah and prayer that you can do and accomplish. So it's interesting is that the last section of Tanya, the author explains things deeper that was discussed before. So this section, essay number 3, the author was coming to explain something that we already learned before in chapter 39 and chapter 40 of the first section of Tanya, and that's as follows. We learned before that when a person studies Torah, so what happens to you is when you study Torah, and I'm sure we all feel it and experience it, your soul gets elevated. Right? Normally throughout the day you're sluggish, and then you come here, you're learning Torah, you're like flying. What happened? Because your soul starts getting elevated, and it feels great. Now, the question is, how strong is that elevation? So in chapter 39 and chapter 40, the author explained that the elevation of your neshama, the elevation of your soul when you study Torah, has to all do with your kavana. Kavana is a Hebrew word. In English it's translated intention, feeling, emotions that you put into it. And to be specific, what are the emotions that we're talking about? Ahavas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. In other words, the greater the love for Hashem, the greater you're in awe for Hashem, that's how great and that's how high your Torah study is going to be elevated. And the author explains, again, this is still an introduction of chapter 39 and 40 in the first section of Tanya, that when a person has love for Hashem and has awe for Hashem, there could be many reasons what's inspiring the love and the awe. So the author explains, let's say, for example, someone's an intellect. Or even if you're not an intellect, but you're harnessing your intellect. It could be naturally that you're an intellect, or you're working yourself to be an intellect. And you sit and you meditate about how great God is, how wonderful God is, how God is making such a tremendous impact in your life. And if not for God, you wouldn't be here. And you start meditating on this, you go, whoa, I love God. Or I'm in awe of God. And both. But a bag of feelings of love and awe, which is based on intellect. So what happens then? And then you study Torah with that love and that awe. So before you sit down to study Torah, that's one of the reasons why we make a blessing before we study Torah, to bring in godliness into the Torah study. And you think about God, how you love Him and you're in awe of Him. Not sitting there, right? You're in love of God, you're in awe of God. Come on, fire it up, right? And you're sitting and studying Torah. So what happens then is, because you're studying Torah based on love and awe, and because the love and awe is born out of intellect, and we know intellect is in the world of Beriyah, there's 4 worlds, Atzilut, the highest spiritually, Beriyah, Yetzira, Asiyah, and intellect is connected to the world of Beriyah, so your soul gets elevated goes out of Asiyah, out of Yetzira, and it goes into the world of Beriyah. Pretty heavy stuff. So when you study Torah, love and awe, if it's based on intellect, thank you. So it's based on intellect, your soul is going to be elevated to the world of Beriyah. What happens if the emotions, the love and the awe, is not based on intellectual meditation? It's naturally, I love God. Natural emotions. So then based on it, you study Torah, so your soul gets elevated to the world of Asiyah and into the world of Yetzira. It doesn't go as high as the world of Beriyah, because again, Yetzira is the world of emotions. Now, so that is so far what's explained before. Again, if the intention is love and awe, if it's based on intellect, it goes to the world of Beriyah. If it's based on emotions, it goes to the world of Yetzira. Now, what happens if you're just sitting down to study Torah? No emotions. No emotion. You're sitting down to study Torah. You're not in love with God. You're not in awe of God. You're sitting down. You're studying Torah. You're learning. You're comprehending. You understand it. You're sitting down. You didn't do any meditation. You didn't make any blessings before. You never meditated. You're just sitting and studying Torah. So then what happens is it doesn't get elevated to the world of Yetzira and Beriyah had you had the love and awe, but it does go up, according to Kabbalah, to the external world of Yetzira, and it creates angels over there. So if it was based on intellect, we'd go to Beriyah. If it was based on the emotions, we'd go into the internal part of Yetzira. Here, just plain studying Torah, you did study Torah, so the soul gets elevated, but again, it's circling around the external world of Yetzira, and it creates over there angels for you. It's all right. It's okay. Now, what happens when somebody prays? So if somebody prays, again, based on love and awe, that's born out of intellect, before prayer you sat and you meditated, and you created love and awe, so then it got elevated to where? To the world of Beriyah. If it was just based on emotion, just like Torah study, it goes to the world of Yetzira. What happens if you're just praying? You walk into the synagogue, or at home, wherever it is, and you're praying, and just praying. No emotions, no love, no awe. You're saying the words of prayer. Just totally neutral. So the Alter taught us, based on Kabbalah, that it doesn't get elevated to the external world of Yetzira, just like Torah study. So you see, there's a major difference. The Alter comes in this chapter and he says we have to understand the difference. Why is it that when it comes to Torah study and when it comes to prayer, that's born out of emotions, love and awe? So if it's born out of emotions of love and awe, of intellect, they both go up to the world of Beriyah, Torah study and prayer. If it's born out of plain emotions, it goes to the world of Yetzira. But what happens if the Torah study is done without emotions of love and awe? So then it does get elevated to the external world of Yetzira, and it creates angels there. But prayer doesn't move. If you're not inspired, it stays right there. It doesn't have any engine, any horsepower to move high. It stays where it is. So the question is, what's the difference? What is the difference? So the author explains like this. What happens is, when you sit down to study Torah, you're studying Torah. It's an intellectual depth. Whether it's the 5 books of Moses, whether it's the prophets, whether it's the Mishnah, whether it's the Talmud, whatever you're studying. So when you're studying, what are you using? You're using your intellect. You can't say, okay, I study Torah and just like glance at a book. If you're not cognizant mentally, intellectually, you're not going to grasp it. So you have to think deep into it and connect to it. So the author explains, when it comes to study Torah, let's say you're not inspired, there's no emotions, no love, no awe, none of the emotions are there. But you're still sitting down and arguing and getting into a piece of Talmud. Again, you forgot for a moment that it's God's Torah. You're just studying Torah. But you're using your brain. Now the fact is, the author explains, every single person, every single Jew, has an innate love for God. There's revealed, but there's innate. We all have the innate love. So since we're studying Torah and we're using our brain to study Torah, to comprehend it, again, referring to Torah study, so even though you didn't meditate, or you didn't have your natural love was not flowing, or the awe was not flowing, but since you're studying and using your intellect, and we know that everyone has a natural love for God, so therefore it does get elevated where? To the world of Yetzira, albeit externally, and it creates angels over there. Now, obviously, the author explains, you can study Torah. So far we studied 2 levels. One is you're studying Torah based on love and awe, and in there was Beriyah, Yetzira, if it's intellect or emotions, or it's neutral, so it goes up. But the author makes it clear, if you're studying Torah literally for ulterior motives, for example, for financial gain, or for honor, or for any other negative reason or personal agenda, not for God, but not neutral, then actually your Torah study gets downgraded. That's for sure. Now, so that's in reference to how he explains why Torah study has the advantage when you're doing it neutrally, why it gets elevated. Why does it get elevated again? Because you're using your intellect, and we have a natural love for God. But now he's going to focus on the other side. However, when a person sits down to pray, if you're praying based on love and awe, it gets elevated. But what happens when you're praying? You're just saying the words, right? You're saying the words. Okay, I'm here in the synagogue, I'm reading the prayers. you're not fired up with love and awe for God. What happens is, we know that the mind is working. So when you're studying Torah, as we said before, so you have to be thinking about what you're studying. But in prayer, if you're not thinking about, if you're not excited about what you're praying, so your mind is wandering. What happens when your mind wanders? So strange thoughts come into there. Now, when strange thoughts come into your prayer, you know what happens to your prayer? It doesn't get elevated, and it gets downgraded. Now, what's interesting is as follows. And this is a powerful Kabbalistic idea, and it's extremely important to know this. Let's say you pray. We have the prayer service. Morning service, afternoon, evening service. And you didn't have any thoughts. So technically, what we just learned got downgraded. Why? Because you had strange thoughts. However, the Alter Rebbe explains, powerful, if you, at some point, go back and pray that specific prayer. Take, for example, Ashrei. Let's say you said Ashrei for 30 days, and you have one holy thought, and love thought. You just said it, you just read the prayers. Got downgraded. But let's say day 31, day 40, whatever it is, a year later, 10 years later, you sit down and you say Ashrei, and you decide, and you meditate on how you love God, and you're feeling the love for God, and you're in awe of God, and you say Ashrei with that. You know what it does? It elevates all the Ashreis you said until now. That's pretty powerful. Or you say Shema one day and you sit and meditate. It elevates all the Shmas until now. Like all of a sudden, right? The scores start coming in. You like that.
When you do the Shema, do you have to do the whole Shema?
Whatever you're doing, that's the point.
Any part of the Shema gets credit.
Any prayer that you focus, and as you first meditate, and you bring in a love for God, you bring in the awe for God, and you meditate on it, and then you say that specific prayer, you've elevated all the past prayers. And that's why it's very, very important. If you can have the proper kavana for the whole prayer service, pick day one prayer that you're going to really, really get into it. This way, that one prayer, that's elevated. Tomorrow, and again, if you can do the whole thing, do the whole thing. But if not, the next day, do the next prayer. Have in mind that you love God and you're in awe of God, and you really have the proper intention for that prayer. Not only do you elevate that prayer, but you elevated all that prayer as many times as you said it throughout your life. It could be hundreds, thousands, maybe 10,000 times. It elevates it all out. That's pretty powerful. And the next day, another one. So again, or you can decide one day it's hard because it's not easy to meditate. You can do the whole prayer service. If you can, that's wonderful. But if not, a good practice, and we actually learned it in one of the JLI courses, is the proper intention is, today pick this, and remember the story with the guy, the bent over prayer book? So every day you add another page that you have the proper kavana. And then you slag off a little. You shouldn't, but if you do, then you go ahead and you do the proper kavana, and it credits you back. So in other words, it's not bad credits. It's right now maybe a bad credit, but it's 100% totally redeemable and elevatable. How? Very simple. Go back and read that prayer. Meditate the way you love God. You're in awe of God. Go back and actually read that prayer with that proper love and awe. It all gets elevated. It's a huge bonus.
Yeah.
Isn't that a huge bonus?
Huge.
One prayer, go back and do it. Now, but
it's like the gift cards you get for the restaurants during the season.
Yes.
For the restaurants,
Yes. So what's interesting is, so even though Torah neutral has a tremendous power, that Torah neutral, because you're thinking of what you're studying, it does get elevated to the world of Yetzira, right? Prayer doesn't. On the other hand, prayer has tremendous gift. One prayer, proper kavana, elevates all the other ones. Torah doesn't work that way. You can't re-elevate retroactive. So simply. So now you're going to say, 1 second. Maybe I shouldn't, right? What am I, with prayer, I'm going to show up to services. Why? Because one day I'll be in this great mood, and guess what? I'll get all the credits from all the prayers I didn't do, which is a good thing to know. You say, come to shul, I'm not in the mood. No problem, you're not in the mood, it's fine. Show up, read the prayers. It's a neutral zone, or maybe downgraded a drop, but when you go back and you'll pray it, you'll elevate it. But you can't elevate something you never prayed for. So you can't elevate if it doesn't exist. A zero can't be elevated. So, but if you pray and it's there, but it's not elevated, later on you can elevate it. However, with Torah study, if you sit and study Torah and you have, so to speak, negative thoughts, how are you elevating that? So the answer is, the Alter Rebbe says, even though it does not get elevated in that way, but we have the power to go ahead and repent. You can do tshuva. And when a person goes ahead and does tshuva for not studying Torah properly, you can actually elevate that Torah. And that's why we know, for example, the Talmud says very, very clearly, a person should always study Torah. Even a person should always study, even for the wrong reasons. That means even if you're studying Torah because someone's paying you, or because you're going to have honor, or someone's going to give you a compliment and say, whatever the point is, study Torah anyway. It's not going to work, and it's going to be downgraded, and I can't even elevate it one day studying that piece of Torah. And the answer is no, because you can do tshuva, and when a person does tshuva, it gets totally elevated. Now, so what did we just learn? That when a person prays, so if it's neutral, it gets downgraded. Nothing happens. So the Alter Rebbe, interesting, he brings two pieces of Zohar. One place in the Zohar it says, like we just learned, that when you pray and you don't have the proper kavanot, it doesn't get elevated. It's in a downgrade position. And another place we learned, the Alter Rebbe brings, that when you pray without the proper intention, it gets elevated to the level of what? Malchus, which is the last sphira in the world of Asiyah. So on one hand, we're saying it doesn't get elevated in one place in the Zohar, and once it says it does get elevated. And the Alter Rebbe explains very, very simple. It doesn't get elevated where? To Zah, the 6 midot of Asiyah. But sure it goes to Malchus Asiyah, so it's not a contradiction. When we're saying it doesn't get elevated, we mean it doesn't get elevated to the world of Zah, the 6 midot of Asiyah. When we're saying it's elevated, only to Malchus of Asiyah. What's the problem? The problem is very, very simple. That everything in this world we receive from Hashem. How do we receive everything? Default setting is from Malchus to Asiyah. From the lowest level, Malchus of the world of Asiyah. That puts us in a neutral state. But on the other hand, when you want great blessings, you got to go higher. Zav Asiyah, you can go to the world of Yetzira, Beriyah, obviously you can bring down greater blessings. So let's say, for example, you're praying for something, and you have the wrong intentions, you're only going to Malchus Asiyah, you're at zero, you didn't accomplish anything. So it's an elevation, but it's an elevation that's not accomplishing. In order to accomplish something, you need to go at least to Zav Asiyah. In order to do that, you need to have the proper intention. So that's the explanation Alter gives to the contradiction seemingly, but it's not a contradiction. And the Alter says that's one issue he deals with. Then he deals with another issue. We find other places that says that when a person prays with the wrong intentions, this is really powerful. It's cute, but it's powerful. When a person prays with the wrong intentions, guess what? One place it says in the Zohar, it goes up even to Zah, the 6 midot, not only of Asiyah, of Yetzira, the world of Beriyah. We just said the most that goes to Malchus the Asiyah, for sure it doesn't go to Zah of Asiyah. And here he says, in one place it goes to the Zah of Beriyah. And the Alter explains, it gets elevated to that level, but unfortunately, because it's not a healthy prayer, it causes a blemish. It causes a pgam. So you don't want that elevation. Yes, it does get elevated, but elevated in a negative way, where it actually causes a blemish for you. Back to the point, again, when you pray without the proper kavanot, it's definitely not elevated. And again, so he clarifies it. Even when we say it gets elevated to the point where it actually creates a blemish, but not that it accomplishes anything. Now, and the Alter gives an example. For example, he says we know that it says when a person does a mitzvah, so every mitzvah is like a garment. You wear garments, you wear clothing, right? Jewelry for ladies. When you wear clothing, so how do you get clothing? How do you get jewelry? How do you get gifts? When you do good things. So when a person does a mitzvah, every time you do a mitzvah, you get another garment. Now, generally speaking, where do the garments come from? Spiritual garments. So in Kabbalah, it says it comes from Gan Eden HaTachton, the lower level of Gan Eden, of which world? Of the world of Asiyah. That's where it comes from. But on the other hand, we find in other places it says, where do the garments come from? It comes from Heichal Beis, the second chamber in the world of Beriyah, which is much higher. Dr. Rick says, obviously it comes from Gan Eden HaTachton and Asiyah, but the fact that it comes from a higher place, that's not the part that's tangible that we can use. So in other words, even though it mentions it comes from other places, but the real tangible place where it comes from is from the place of Gan Eden Tachtam Adam Asiyah, just to show you an example that when it says it comes from higher, the question is what's coming from higher, and so on and so forth. Okay, now, back to the point. So what happens when a person prays with strange thoughts versus a person studies Torah for selfish reasons? So as we learned already before, when a person prays with strange thoughts, it is elevated. Where to? Malchus Ta'asiyah. It doesn't accomplish much until you go ahead and re-pray it. But praying with strange and negative thoughts gets you elevated to Malchus Ta'asiyah. Right now it accomplishes not much. Obviously later on you can go back and credit. However, when a person studies Torah, if it's neutral, we said it's higher than prayer, neutral. But on the other hand, studying Torah with negative is actually lower than prayer, as we discussed before, and that the only way to elevate it is by doing true tshuva, true repentance. Now, on the other hand, again, back to the original point of the chapter, with afterwards explaining what's the difference between Torah study and prayer. Why Torah study neutral affects angels in the world of Yetzira versus prayer doesn't. So he explains again why is Torah study so powerful, and he says like this: because when a person studies Torah, neutral, again, no love and awe, but again, not negative. So he said it's not worse than when an innocent child studies Torah. When an innocent child studies Torah, there's no love, there's no awe, but nevertheless, an innocent child's Torah study is very, 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 very impactful. Not only that, the author explains that when an innocent child studies Torah neutral, and not only neutral, but he's being bribed to study, you give him a candy, you give him a reward, guess what? It's 100% elevated. Again, why? Because the child is pure. So the same thing also, when a person studies Torah neutral, it gets elevated. Now, the interesting is, the author finishes off and he says, the Zohar tells us, that when an innocent child studies Torah, the angels take the Torah study literally to the highest world, the world of Atzilut. And that's why it's really, really so important to inspire and encourage children, even again with gifts, to study Torah or study with them, because their Torah study gets elevated all the way, the angels take it all the way to the world of Atzilut. So you see the important factor both of Torah study and prayer. Just to recap in a very, very practical way, and I think that Tanya over here is teaching us such a beautiful lesson about Torah study and such a beautiful lesson about prayer. And it's really an inspiration to be able to study Torah and obviously to pray. So there's no question about it that the best way to study Torah and the best way to pray is beforehand to meditate about God, to imbue yourself with a love for God, to be in awe of God. Then when you study Torah and you pray, it gets totally elevated. Obviously to the world of Beriyah. Obviously if you come one with God, it goes to the world of Atzilut. On the other hand, if at least you can just be excited about love and awe for God, we'll go to the world of Yetzira. Torah study, on the other hand, neutral, also gets elevated to the external world of Yetzira. And that's okay. And even if you're doing it for negative reasons, which is not okay, what else I would say, do it. Because one day you'll do tshuva and it will elevate it elevate it as well. And the same thing also with prayer. Obviously the highest level, if it's based on emotions and you meditate and you study some chassidus beforehand and you're inspired. But even if you're doing it for neutral reasons, which we just learned gets downgraded, or even when you think negative thoughts in prayer, guess what? Don't freak out. Don't go crazy. Why? Because you can sit back and say that prayer again with the proper kavana, and it will elevate all the prayers of the past. Which I think this lesson is really, really a very, very inspiring lesson. It teaches you, A, the right way to do things, meditate, get inspired, love God, be in awe of God, study Torah, pray based on that, and life is great. But even if you're not holding that level, the prayers can be elevated later on, and the Torah study still works. And even in the worst case scenario, when you study for the wrong reasons, you have the power to do tshuva. And really, really, what the Alter Rebbe finished off in a beautiful way is how much it's important to inspire your own children and other children to study Torah, because their Torah study, and again, even if they're inspired for wrong reasons, literally the angels take their Torah study to the world of Atzilut. And thank God we have a school here, so we have children learning. So we have the schus, right? Our community, that we have children that are studying Torah innocently, and their Torah is going to the world of Atzilut, which is a tremendous blessing for them, and Baruch Hashem for our community as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.